folks, and welcome to episode 15 of Cookie Pocket, an attempt at a podcast where we are we are with Zach and Christian today. And we're here out in rainy Seattle, and no, I'm just kidding. We are talking about No Country for Old Men. It is a 2007 neo-western thriller directed by Joel and Ethan Coen and based off of the novel of the same name by Cormac McCarthy. And it follows Texan welder and NAM veteran Llewellyn Moss, played by Josh Brolin, who stumbles upon the bloody aftermath of a shootout over a drug deal, as well as a briefcase chock full of money, of which is sought after by Anton Chigurh, a hired psychotic hitman played by Javier Bardem, and Terrell County Sheriff Ed Tom Bell, of whom is after Chigurh, and he's played by Tommy Lee Jones, Zach's equivalent to Morgan Freeman. So, what were your overall impressions of the film?
Well, I feel like I should go first to clear up my opinion on Tommy Lee Jones. We've had a bit of a running joke about this, where I feel like Tommy Lee Jones is kind of an actor equivalent in stature to somebody like Morgan Freeman, where he can show up and kind of work by just sort of elderly charisma alone within a role. But that's not really my general thoughts on the movie. I absolutely love this movie. It's definitely one of my favorite movies of the 2000s, meaning 2000 to 2010. And I just think it's a fantastic movie all around. I think this is kind of the textbook definition of a perfect movie. Every single frame in this film, every single shot is perfectly set up. No aspect of this film feels sloppy or uncalculated. Everything feels so precise and so planned out, and everything is so well executed that I don't think there's a weak link in this entire movie. I love the book. I love the film. I even love the ending, which we'll be talking about later, I guess. But yeah, I definitely recommend this film 5 out of 5.
Well, I liked this film a lot. I ended up giving it a 3.5 out of 5, much to Zach's chagrin.
Traitor.
And this is all despite the fact that I agree with pretty much everything Zach just said. I think every technical aspect of this film is fantastic. What kind of left me hanging were first the ending. That's like the one point of disagreement I have with Zach, is I was somewhat frustrated by the way it ended. And secondly, they have this tendency a couple of times in the film to kind of skip over really important events to the plot and the central characters. Like, for example, we stumble upon Josh Brolin's character's dead body and we don't see the shootout happen. And we don't really know what happens to Chigurh by the end of the movie. He just kind of walks away and is presumably on the lam still. And I guess that's one way to handle it, and to some extent it fits the tone that the movie's going for, but I still found it frustrating as a viewer. I wanted to know what happened, and I didn't think that the dramatic purpose of skipping over Brolin's character's death is enough to merit not showing that on screen, personally. So I gave it a 3.5 out of 5. I enjoyed it a lot. I think it's incredibly well made, but I don't think it's perfect.
Okay, well, I gave this film a 4.5 out of 5, Christian, and Zach. But the reason why is because it is uniquely nihilistic in virtually every way.
Yeah.
And a lot of what the film is trying to achieve is essentially just to instill the fact that nothing matters and everything is going to be status quo, even when you're focusing on, like, incidents such as these, because it's really just based off of one single incident, and then also Chigurh's, like, psychotic aspects of him and all the crimes and stuff that he committed. So it's very, very isolated, and it a lot of problems that a lot of movies, especially now, try to achieve that aren't necessarily westerns. They could just be action movies. They kind of just take isolated incidents and blow them up exponentially. Mm-hmm. And that is usually a very easy way to get the viewer interested and feel compelled to actually emote in reaction to the film. And and enjoy it overall. But in this case, it goes the complete opposite direction. It kind of tricks you into thinking that this is about to blow up into a much bigger thing than it actually is, when it really doesn't. It really takes a nosedive towards the end, kind of grounding the viewer, making them feel like there's no purpose to what they just watched. But it's not but at least in the aspect of that there's no purpose, like they didn't gain anything that's tangible beyond like just compelling thoughts and things like that, and just understanding different messages and tones that the book also likely tried to get across. Yeah. But yeah, overall very well done. In a lot of ways, the cinematography, I really don't see anything wrong with it at all. There's not a single thing I would change about the cinematography or the sound design. And a lot of the dialogue moments, every single scene has some memorable line in it. That was kind of like a recurring thing between the three of us as we were watching it together. The Southern accents and the 80s vibe, the aesthetic that is pulled off very well in this movie and not in any Netflix movie. The main reason why also being that it's based off of a book from 1980. So, But yeah, I mean, a lot of this film is very unique, and it is there's very little way you could tell how it was actually going, and yeah, 4.5 out of 5. So, I guess I can continue that into my compliments by saying the film had no score pretty much at all. Yep. I looked into it. There actually was score that I'm pretty sure all three of us completely missed, but there's 16 minutes worth, and most of it is in the end credits. There's Sheriff Bell in the opening narration. Apparently, there's a score, and I literally don't remember it at all, which might be a good thing. And then Shigur's moment in the gas station. There's also a very, very subtle score.
Oh yeah. I think that might just be like ambient noise, which technically counts as a score, but it's not like, somebody comes out with a trumpet or anything like that.
Yeah. It was composed, at least.
And we have the mariachi band. Can't forget that.
And the mariachi band. Yes, that is probably the only song, I think, in the entire movie.
Yeah.
But yeah, the film solely relies on a healthy mixture of dialogue and visually appealing locations in West Texas and sound design, including emphatic sounds like gunshots, the door deadbolts being shot off by Shigur, and then his bolt pistol sound, which is actually a nail gun, is what they used. To make that sound. So between the dialogue, the locations, so the set, and the sound design, which one of those three struck home the most for you? And do you think it worked well considering the overall tone and message the film was trying to convey?
Christian, do you want to start?
Sure. Well, I think the screenplay is really what made this whole movie for me. I think that's by far the strongest element. Except for maybe like Javier Bardem's performance. But I mean, as far as we can actually compare these different entities, I would say that the screenplay is what caught me the most in isolated moments and made me think and made me like lean in and feel more invested overall. And I can't even remember any of the lines off the top of my head, but it's just, in my experience, it's very difficult to conceive of a line of dialogue that is both dramatic and iconic, but also feels natural and doesn't feel too trumped up or dramatically forced or anything like that. And I think all of the lines that we pointed out as we were watching as lines that people wish they would have written are ones that felt really natural despite their gravitas and the places they were used in the film. So not just being a clever and well-written screenplay that suits the characters, but also being one that feels natural in the setting that's applied. I would say it's pretty much a perfect screenplay. I have no gripes with it whatsoever.
Yeah, I would say when I first watched this, a couple years now, maybe 2 or 3, the things that really stuck with me were the screenplay and the dialogue, which I think we have to, even though it's an adapted screenplay, it won the Oscar for Best Adapted Screenplay. I think we also have to give a lot of credit there to Cormac McCarthy, because this movie is pretty much a literal adaptation of the book. You read the book, it feels like you're reading the script of the movie pretty much. And the visuals really stuck with me during that first watch. But this second watch, I think the sound design in this really is fantastic. It's people maybe don't necessarily realize, but it's very difficult to have long periods of time in a movie without any kind of score, without the viewer thinking, this is dull, nothing's happening. Because generally the score is there to kind of push events along and sort of tell the audience you should be excited or you should be tense. And this movie goes pretty much entirely without that. Every single moment of this movie is incredibly tense, entirely based on the merit of the dialogue and the visuals and the direction. And those, like you mentioned, those intermittent loud gun shots, the nail gun of Chigurh's massive suppressed shotgun or rifle. I'm not a gunman. But those kind of intermittent loud sounds are perfectly timed as releases of tension. And then you've just got all this empty silence where everybody in the audience is just thinking, what is going to happen? I like I said, I think technically this is a perfect movie, but the sound design, I think, is kind of one of the unsung heroes of why this movie works so well.
Yeah, that was a gripe I had a lot with the movies that we've reviewed previously, especially older ones where it felt like there was a lot of dead air sound-wise, and it just would totally suck me out of whatever film that was if there wasn't much going on with regard to the audio. But I had never felt bored because of that in this movie, despite how frequently it was quiet. So, yeah.
And Zach might be a little bit more familiar with this, but it actually reminded me a lot of horror films, and how a lot of horror films, especially modern ones, rely way too much on score and ambience instead of natural sounds and emphatic sounds. And I feel like a lot of movies could do a lot better off without a score, almost, in a lot of ways. And if it was directed slightly better and XYZ other complaints. But yeah, in a lot of ways, I've read other reviews as well. A lot of people think that this is very much a horror film in some of its sequences indoors. And I definitely agree with that. But I would have to agree with Christian a lot more on the dialogue. I feel like the dialogue is definitely what really, fits the movie really well. And it's especially hard to do that when you have these silent, dead moments and all you're relying on is visuals and sound and, the very subtle movements of the actors and things like that. But yeah, I think the dialogue is so perfectly meshed that you really almost forget like when something's supposed to be a sequence that is really tense or it's supposed to be a purely a plot developing moment. And especially with Chigurh, I think Chigurh's character really does that the most because all of his dialogue is entirely tense. It's his whole character is basically is just pure tension. Yeah. And Javier Bardem is definitely a major component of that. But yeah, I think the dialogue, there's a lot of, I wouldn't say memorable lines like Christian was definitely right. I would say I can't remember a lot of them off the top of my head because they mesh so well with the movie. Like you really felt invested. Not like the lines were really important, but like they were, natural and organic and definitely had there's a lot of meat to them. And not in the sense where it's like Shakespearean, but in the sense as it's like these are wise people, and especially the three men are very wise and have seen a lot and experienced a lot, and they're also very normal. So they're normal men that are like just Southern guys that like do normal Southern things, or at least in their free time. In their free time they do Southern things, I guess, but Chigurh doesn't really have much free time, so I guess that doesn't really work. But yeah, I mean, besides Chigurh, I would say Moss and the sheriff are definitely just normal Southern men, and they always they really stick their scenes very well, and obviously their actors are very well they're very well cast. So I guess this leads to my next question: which of the three main characters was your favorite and why?
Ooh. Who are we considering the three mains then? Bardem, Brolin, and Jones? Is that the three? Okay. That's really difficult.
I can go first. It's not difficult for me.
All right, go ahead, Christian.
It definitely has to be Chigurh. It's not even close for me. He's just by far the most interesting character, and he does so much with so little, the actor. He, with a 5-second look, like just a shot of his face, and his face can be totally static, but so much can be communicated in it. Yet the viewer is unclear of what his motive is. There's just so much intrigue contained in the most subtle of expressions that Bardem provides the viewer with. that it's difficult to describe how enticing and how drawn you are to basically everything that he does. It's just unbelievable. And Mitchell, I think while we were watching, you said that on some list he was rated as one of the best movie villains of all time. And after having watched it, I would definitely agree with that. I don't think I've ever found a villain as interesting as I found him in this movie. And it's in this sort of weird moral code of sorts, or more of an honor code, I guess, that he conducts himself with, where he gives Brolin's character the chance to save his wife if he accepts the fact that he's going to die, and he doesn't. And there's just this very twisted ideology behind the moral angle, and the whole coin flipping thing kind of reminds me of like Two-Face from Batman, which is kind of a cornier version of that, I know, but it's just all meshed together really well and made him a very interesting character. So he was definitely my favorite.
Yeah, I mean, I think Shiger is definitely kind of the poster character for this movie, literally, in that he's on the poster. But I think when people think of this movie, they think of Javier Bardem with the tank and the air gun kind of hobbling along, or the car exploding behind him. I think most of the iconic shots of this movie have him in them, and Bardem won Best Supporting Actor for the role, which I think he totally deserves. Like you said, he's able to communicate so much with just this. Throughout the entire movie, he's pretty much wearing the same blank face, but you get so many emotions and ideas entirely from just his eyes and the way he stands and moves his head and his neck. It's a very reptilian, almost like snake-like performance. When you look at a snake, you don't think you can't see like the snake smiling or hatching plans based on what it's saying on its face, but you look in that snake's eyes and you think, that thing's got it out for me or a rat or whatever it's looking at. But at the same time, I do think Tommy Lee Jones' character is in a weird way kind of the heart of this movie. I think the story kind of revolves around his character, and I think the themes of the movie really revolve around his character. I think without his character, this movie and this story doesn't really have the message it wants to have. I mean, we'll talk about that more when we get to the ending, but I feel that despite the fact that Tommy Lee Jones' character doesn't necessarily do a lot in the movie, and he's constantly following behind Moss and Shiger, I think without him, this movie would be kind of rudderless. So I think that Tommy Lee Jones kind of is really, really important to how this movie turns out.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that, but yeah, Shiger gang. Yeah, Bardem, I mean, I've seen him as Silva in one of the 007 movies.
Skyfall,
and Skyfall, yeah. I believe it was Skyfall. And then seeing him in this, I mean, there's just so much natural expression that he has. In fact, I think there's more to his dead stare than there is to him actually saying anything. To add on to what Zach had said. But yeah, I mean, he's a very natural villain, and the coin flip thing is like, it's kind of cliche in a way, but it's not. I mean, yeah, Two-Face, but I mean, it's not like it's unrealistic. Like, you could totally imagine this person being a real person.
Yeah. And
the things that he achieves are absolutely achievable in real life. I mean, in the 80s at least, he would have gotten away with a lot of what he had done.
Yeah.
And especially in a small town in Texas. But yeah, I mean, he's a very natural and believable character, and he was cast perfectly. And one of the interesting things I find about him is that his accent is his natural accent, Bardem's Spanish accent. So, and that is also very intimidating when you're comparing it to all of these other Southerners that are obviously Texas residents. I mean, if they aren't, it's hard to tell. But these random, Texan people, and he's just going up to them and has this, foreign accent, which is very, I guess, it's not just intimidating because he sounds like a foreigner, obviously, but he's intimidating because his accent is so distinct and different and very oppressive sounding compared to like a dumb sounding Southerner, I guess. Is what
he really stands out in the setting.
Yeah. There's no way that Zach can make that PC, but
it's like throwing a cat among the pigeons, like with his vocally.
But I mean, it's that on top of all of his mannerisms and his very intimidating stature and his unfamiliar haircut, his unfamiliar clothing, and every aspect about him is very different, and you can clearly tell there's something absolutely wrong with him the second that he walks in the room.
Yeah,
right. I would just argue real quick that I think him being sort of a fish out of water is what makes that. I don't think that him being Spanish is what makes him scary at all. No. I just think it's a natural fish out of water type thing where just naturally being different from the other characters he's surrounded by in the film distinguishes everything he does a little bit more.
I think you could tell the same kind of story, like, let's say you set the story in Spain, and Shiger was the only Southerner or something like that. I think it would achieve the same effect because he would still be standing out and feel so different from everybody else.
I could have just said the fact that he's not Texan or the fact that he doesn't have a Southern accent. I could have just said that. But
we got you back on the rails.
Here, I got it. You ready? Okay, because Spanish is a Romance language and Southern accents are not romantic sounding. They're very twangy and very cliche attributed to rednecks. So there we go. I've got
it out of the paper. Get our best spin team on this.
Yes. But yes, he was definitely my favorite character. He's an amazing actor. This is his perfect. This is literally a perfect role for him. There's nobody else I could have imagined to come even close to this. He's definitely one of my favorite in the 2000s villains that I can think of. Didn't Avengers come out in 2010?
Pretty sure
2012.
2012. All right, we're safe. Loki's not up there, but but yes. What was your least favorite of the three and why?
I'm sorry, Zach, but it has to be said. I think Tommy Lee Jones is just a little bit overrated. I think he does his job to a T. I think he does everything that he has to do perfectly fine. But similar to my overall B+-ish assessment of this film compared to your A++ assessment, I'm growing a little uncomfortable with the idea that a film is more critically meritable because it is pessimistic and portrays pessimism strongly. And I do think there's this general idea, not just in cinema, but in art overall, that it is often more affecting to portray negative emotions. And in some cases, in many cases, I think that's true, but I wouldn't use that as a means of identifying pessimistic art as better art, if that makes sense. So I think Tommy Lee Jones is good, but I think his character kind of just does a lot of talking and doesn't do a lot of things on his own, and pretty much all of his involvement concerns the actions of Shiger and his apathy to some extent with handling those things, as at least as shown in the final conversation, I would say. And so I think he's a relatable character. I think he's got the voice and the acting chops to pull it off, but I don't necessarily think that he was amazing or groundbreaking. I just think he kind of does his job. So, I don't know.
I'm really raring at the bit to talk about this ending, but I mean, in terms of which of the three I think is my least favorite, I think it's hard to say, because I think all three of these lead actors give great performances and need to be in the movie. I think it's a shame you didn't include Woody Harrelson as Carson Wells, because although I really do like Woody Harrelson as an actor as well, I feel like maybe he's the big name actor who gives the least impressive performance in the movie.
It's part of the next question, Zach.
Oh, well, look at me. I can tell the future. But in terms of the lead three, I would say it's hard to say. I think, weirdly, I think Tommy Lee Jones is both the most important character to the movie in some way, and also the least impressive performance. Because, like Christian said, his character kind of is just there. His character doesn't do a lot. He as an actor isn't really required to do much other than tell sort of folksy old man stories. and kind of express that general apathy of kind of his character and his generation. But I think that's really important, and him being sort of unremarkable, I think really works for the film. I'll fill in some of those blank spots later, but I think in a weird way, he's kind of my favorite and least favorite lead in the movie.
That's good. Yeah, yeah, I'm gonna have to say my boy Tommy, not my favorite. He has to be my least favorite, although Zach, I completely agree with you. I think he's the most important.
Mm-hmm.
But in terms of him being, a sheriff, hey, he does it. He's like a Texan sheriff, and he's very witty and wise, like many Texas sheriffs probably are. And yeah, I mean, this is a good role for him, and I think he was the first actor actually casted for the entire movie. So they knew that they were going to have some, older white guy with a southern accent that top billed casted in this. But
yeah, I saw that. Just mentioning alternate actors. I was doing some reading up on this, and I saw that originally they wanted Heath Ledger to play Llewellyn Moss, but he turned it down. And Bardem almost left the production at one point, and they were going to hire the British actor Mark Strong to play Shigur, which I think I'm glad they got Bardem back, because I like Mark Strong, and he could have done something with the role, but I don't think he would have been nearly good as Bardem. But I'm sorry, Mitchell, I interrupted you.
It's okay, sir. But yeah, I mean, sheriff, he does his job. He does exactly what he's supposed to do, and we find out that he too is also a troubled man. Mm-hmm. Zach, you're gonna have to wait 2 more questions before we get to the ending question. Did any of the supporting or side characters surprise you in any way? Is there anyone that particularly stuck out to you?
I liked Llewellyn's mom a lot. She was funny. I really needed that.
Oh, I think that's his wife's mom.
Oh, yeah.
Because Llewellyn's mother is dead. Because one of the first lines we were like, "That's a good line." Was Llewellyn, your mother's dead. I guess I'll tell her then.
Tell her myself. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So then his wife's mom was good. Yeah. And I also thought the actress who played his wife was good, though. I mean, I have to say it. Unfortunately, the women in this film are kind of not super important, and that's fine for the narrative's sake. Like, I don't think that the narrative should be fundamentally altered in order to make it more inclusive. But Llewellyn's wife is definitely just kind of there and running because he's in danger, and then she's in danger, and that's kind of it. But I think the actress that plays her is really good, especially in the final scene with Shigur at her home, and she's scrambling to pay the bills and whatnot. So I think she definitely does a good job of portraying that sort of everyman, hardworking American type stereotype, I guess. But yeah, I thought it suited the film well, at least.
I think she's a good contributing character to the plot development, because she's the only character actually that speaks to all 3 main characters throughout the entire film.
Yeah.
And she she kind of helps with the audience asking questions. So
yeah, that's for sure.
But you're definitely right, Christian. What you said is right. But yeah, I liked Carla Jean a lot. But go ahead, Zach.
I would say that I do like Carla Jean a lot, and although she doesn't do a ton with the plot itself, I wouldn't necessarily say that she's entirely outside of like the category of strong female character, because she kind of does sort of verbally face down Shigur towards the end when she may or may not be killed, and she kind of tells him like, look, this whole thing with the coin flipping, that's nonsense. Like, it's entirely up to you whether you're going to kill me or not. And she sort of denies him that sort of moral, I guess, moral justification in his mind of, oh, well, it's on the coin. And I think that is kind of a strong character thing to stand up against him. But I think in terms of side characters, if we're going to call Woody Harrelson a side character, I do really like that character. And I like the role that he plays, because I think he's the least remarkable of our well-known actors in the movie, like I said. But I think that without that character, you wouldn't quite have the sense of what a threat Shigur is. Because at least throughout the first act or 2, you kind of get the feeling that Carson Wells is maybe the only person who could potentially, possibly stop Shigur. And then when Shiger takes him out like as easy as swatting a fly, you recognize this is not going to end well at all. And from there, things are pretty much a constant downward spiral. But I do also like just kind of the people that Shiger interacts with along the way. The man at the gas station, although he's only in one scene, I think he does a great job with that kind of escalating, like, this is a standard transaction to there's something really weird about this guy. I think with only a couple really short lines, he does a pretty good job of portraying that kind of fear and sense of apprehension. Same thing with the woman behind the desk at the trailer park who refuses to give Shiger Moss's records and then sort of recognizes when the toilet flushes in the other room, if that guy hadn't been there, this guy might have killed me. I think she does a great job at kind of portraying that realization as well. I don't really think there's a bad actor in this entire film, to be honest. I think everybody, whether it be a main or a side character, totally kind of knocks it out of the park in their individual role.
Except maybe the clothing store guy. Probably the worst.
I mean, I guess maybe.
Oh, I like him.
I do kind of like him too.
We needed that energy.
I think part of the charm.
That positive vibe.
Part of the charm, I think, of this story and of Cormac McCarthy's writing in general is that even people who would typically just be extras in the story that just say, like, that'll be $5.95 or have, like, one line at the store or something, have some kind of, like, individual little quirk that makes them stand out. He really writes, like, background characters as real people. And I think that's really great.
Yeah, I definitely liked Carson the best. Woody Harrelson, I mean, he slipped right into that part. Maybe because his dad actually was a contract killer in Texas that killed a federal judge a year before the book came out.
I heard about that.
What?
Yes.
So maybe that's where he gets that energy from.
Maybe. I don't know if he knew about that, but at least not at that point in his life. But
right, yeah. But no, he's got, I gotta say, the accents, I'm telling you, the accents really put the vibe down. Because when you kind of you don't really feel like you're in New York City a lot, for example. If you're like if you hear side characters talking, usually they don't even have New York accents a lot of the time. Except maybe in Spider-Man movies, Sam Raimi's gang. But yeah, I mean, you really, when you have, there's a lot that you can accomplish with a lot of that southern aspects, and those side characters really hit that home. And like Zach had said, when the Coen brothers having these background characters have their own little stories, even though it's just like a little like breadcrumbs worth, it still adds a lot of tension and adds a lot of value to what Shiger is doing. Bad value, but value nonetheless. Yeah. Yeah, I would say Carson is definitely probably my favorite. He didn't necessarily surprise me a lot. Considering we've all seen Woody Harrelson enough times. Yeah. But he's similar to Tommy Lee Jones in that way. But he was definitely a really important character to developing Shiger's character. So, Zach, you're definitely right about that. But did any of the deadpan humor work for you, despite the film's strict focus on nihilism and depression overall?
I think definitely. I've heard some people define this movie as like a pitch black comedy, and I think while most of the movie is kind of the dark aspect of that comedy, I think you can kind of look at it that way, because there are occasional moments in this that are both extremely tense but also kind of humorous. A bit that at least Christian, you seemed to find kind of funny when we were watching it was there's a scene where Llewellyn goes back to this motel where he's hidden the money in the air conditioning vent. And he gets the room behind the one that he was in, and he's reaching around in the vent trying to get the case back. And then he hears Shiger shoot all the guys in the apartment on the other side of the wall, and he just pauses with this little look in his eye. And you can both take that as like, oh boy, the stakes are rising, or you can take that as like the punchline to an extremely twisted, dark joke. Yeah. There's other more obviously humorous aspects, like the kid on the bridge who keeps asking if Llewellyn was in a car crash, or the kid at the end who won't stop mentioning the bone that's sticking out of Shiger's arm. There are little things like that are a little more obviously humorous, but I do think there is some genuine dark humor in this that really works.
Yeah, Christian. I agree. I mean, I think I would have had even less patience for the Tommy Lee Jones conversational stuff if there weren't these comedic breaks. Like we mentioned earlier, the opening bit with Llewellyn telling his wife to tell his mom that he loves her, but his mom's dead, so he'll tell her himself. Haha, that's funny, but also like, oh, he's gonna die. Haha, that's funny. So I do think, I think that the darker comedy is the only sort of comedy that would suit this well. Like I don't think
No.
like slapstick would be awful in this, obviously.
I think the one point that kind of verges into maybe being a little too broad, and I say broad, but it's by like half a degree, is when they go into Llewellyn's trailer, Tommy Lee Jones and his deputy, and they find the sweating milk on the table, and the deputy recognizes, "Oh, Sheriff, we just missed him." Like, I think his reaction is a little too big, maybe. But that is pretty funny. And when Tommy Lee Jones sits down and says, like, well, what are we gonna put a call out for? A man who's recently drunk milk? That's really funny as well. So I don't think there's any of that humor in the movie that isn't funny. It's just that one moment feels to me like a half a degree, maybe a little too broad.
Yeah, and we didn't mention the deputy earlier, but I actually think sort of like how Tommy Lee Jones justifies the arcs and the messages communicated in this movie. I think the deputy is a really necessary foil to Jones, in that he's like the young, excited recruit that hasn't let all the pessimism and inevitability of failure settle into him yet. He really functions well in the broader frame of the movie.
Yeah, and Belle is like, if you just saw Tommy Lee Jones just looking at everything, not saying anything, that would be like the most boring sequence I've ever seen in my entire life. Like, Tommy Lee Jones is just such a boring character by himself. And and that's why he works so well in Men in Black as well. And he's a lot, I feel like he's a lot more natural in this part, I would say, in that sense. But I mean, his line, I mean, he's like absolute dead pan. Like, the pan is freaking dead in the ground 6 feet under. Like, he is so depressed. The man is constantly depressed. Even I think it was in Men in Black 3, he was like just doing the mail, post mail guy or whatever. He looks so depressed.
Yes.
In those shorts, he looks so depressed. But that works really well. And Josh Brolin comes off as very, very natural. Like, this is totally him. It's almost like the Coen brothers they weren't even trying to be funny. Like, that's how natural it is. Like, it's such a natural, like, he's asked Sugar, and he's like, "Sugar, what?" Like that, in the hospital, and the dog chasing after him. That was purposeful for sure. They showed the dog, and the dog's like making a smiling expression coming after him, and even though the dog dies, it's still so funny, for some reason. But yeah, I think it works. I think it works beautifully, and it's like Zach had said, very, very dark, extremely black comedy, but it's not even a part, like, you don't feel like it's a genre breaking thing. It's absolutely just a part of the natural progression of the movie and the plot. So here we go, Zach. Here you go. Okay, are you happy now?
I am.
Are you content with how the film ended? And did any of the 3 character arcs conclude? The ones that were concluded, did they bother you in any way?
You know what? I'm gonna let Christian go first so I can hit him with the death blow. Go ahead, Christian.
Well then, here we go. No, I was not satisfied. I wanted to know what happened to Sugar, and I realized that that's probably why it ended, because not knowing what happened is more captivating than knowing what did happen or whatever. But I'm still annoyed. I still want to know what happened, even if that's less captivating. And I mean, as far as the character arcs go, I guess my broader issue with Tommy Lee Jones's character is I don't really think he has much of an arc. He's just kind of bitter and pessimistic at the beginning and bitter and pessimistic at the end. And it's more like Sugar and Llewellyn's arcs are used to illustrate what we already knew was true about Jones's character. So to me, the ending to me felt a little bit fruitless. And like, though I like Tommy Lee Jones and I understand the importance of his character in the broader scheme, it didn't really feel like there was much change for his character, at least. And it didn't feel like Sugar's arc was resolved. And Llewellyn is killed off screen and very unceremoniously. So that's basically why I took off points in my ratings, because I was very dissatisfied with how it ended.
And I would argue that that's exactly the point, and the reason the movie ends that way. I think a lot of people who are dissatisfied with this ending maybe go in blind or go in expecting something along the lines of a typical Western. And they maybe want this movie to end with a showdown between Brolin and, well, his name's not Brolin, Moss and Shiger.
I'm hearing the Final Countdown vibes right now, Zach.
And they want some kind of satisfaction from that. But I don't think that's what this movie is about. I think there's a reason that this movie rarely ever shows you significant events of violence. We don't see the drug interaction that goes wrong at the beginning of the story to kind of set everything off. We don't see Llewellyn's death. Because this movie isn't about gunfights and violence. It's about Tommy Lee Jones' character recognizing that the world has outgrown him and outgrown people like him. It's right there in the title. This country, this world is not for old men anymore. Tommy Lee Jones' character comes from a time that sort of believes in more of a strict sense of right and wrong, of good and bad, where justice wins. The cop gets the robbers, the sheriff gets the bandit or the gunslinger, and then at the end of the day, Gary Cooper rides off into the sunset. But this whole movie is kind of about his character realizing that the world isn't like that anymore. The good guys aren't totally just. The guy you're rooting for most of this movie is a thief who stole this money and refused to give a dying man water. Everything's cast in shades of gray. There is no real morality or right or wrong anymore. And the whole movie is kind of Tommy Lee Jones trying to find some reason to believe in good in the world and find that sense of right and wrong and justice. And every event of violence that he catches up to throughout this movie just reinforces the pessimism that he already has, until at the end of the story, he's recognized, you know what, the world, the country's not for me anymore. And he retires. They say at the end he's retired, he's just spending his days out on the ranch, because he can no longer exist in a world that has outgrown him, essentially. And I think maybe you recognize that a little bit more on a second watch. I definitely recognized it more on a second watch and after reading the book. But I think after you recognize that that's kind of what the movie's about, rather than the movie being about Llewellyn Moss running away from Anton Chigurh, I think everything kind of clicks together and the movie becomes just a fantastic experience. But
And it's kind of like a twisted hero's journey in a way, because you kind of have these three men that represent three different aspects of the main themes. So you kind of have Llewellyn being the potential hero, and you have Chigurh being a part of the, also like the Mexican cartels and other criminals, but him being like a very standout villain that reinforces the villainous status quo and the pessimism and nihilism. And then you have Sheriff Bell, who's kind of like the neutral almost, but he's neutral, but he's understanding of how the world becomes the way that it is. And like Zach had described him, I think you described it perfectly. I think that he's realizing that this is how the world's supposed to be, that this country is not for older men who believe in heroism and these great, beautiful things, these idealistic utopias where there's nothing bad's ever going to happen and the good guys will always have an edge over the bad guys. But he goes, even going in the beginning of the movie, he kind of shows, the fact that he's even going after Chigurh shows that this might just be a little ounce of hope, that he might have a little ounce of hope in Moss. Yeah. And it's not, it's most of the time he's very, pessimistic and does not believe this is going to work. But the fact that he even does it, the fact that he even still has a job as a sheriff still shows that he still has some, recognizes some point of humanity, that there is going to be like some optimistic thing that could happen, like Moss could actually win over this guy, because really it almost sounds like he's like a ref in the cat and mouse game for a little bit. Yeah. And when he's talking to the recruit, you can kind of sense that. But at the end, after he's talking about the dreams and things like that, just he looks totally dead, like dead more than Tommy Lee Jones was before the movie even started. He's totally dead at this point. He's freaking drinking the coffee. His wife's like, "How you doing, honey?" And he's like, "Bruh, listen, I just had these 2 crappy dreams, and my dad was in the cave with the fire, and I woke up. It was so sad." And it's a very realistic dream. He describes it exactly the way as a natural person would describe dreams like that. And he says, "And then I woke up," as in, then I realized this is no country for old men. Dun, dun, dun. So that's essentially what you're supposed. I feel like it was what you're supposed to get from the ending. So overall, I very much agree with it. Chigurh gets off just like many psychotic killers have in the past. And then Moss, who's the only potential for any source of optimism, and he's very tactical and calculated in the way that he tries to defend himself and get away, still just dies. Because everybody's telling him, including that lady at the pool that was trying to flirt with him, even though he was married, was saying, I forgot the exact quote, but he was essentially telling him that you're not going to be safe anywhere you go. Like, bad things are always going to follow you. You're going to get what's coming to you, or something like that.
And eventually, he's been planning all this time for Chigurh following him, and he ends up being taken out by this group of Mexicans who are also looking for the drugs that we'd never even seen up until like 2 scenes before then. So
and
it
you think about it,
reinforces kind of that anarchy of the world. Things just sometimes go badly, and all the best laid plans end up meaning nothing.
Right, and the mariachi band is probably the only thing that will ever give anyone any hope about anything ever. But yeah, hey, Christian, do you have any other rebuttal, or are we correct?
No,
Does the jury rest?
I don't even necessarily disagree with everything you guys said. All I'm saying is, even though the ending fulfilled the purpose that the film was seeking to fulfill, it left me as a viewer dissatisfied. That's all I have to say about it. It doesn't mean it's objectively wrong or anything you guys said is incorrect. It's just how I feel about the way it ended. So
Okay, we have to go. Christian, go do the thing.
Okay, words at Zach with numbers from Zach. Based on this movie, the rundown. Okay. Yeah, 60 seconds. Mitchell, are you ready?
Yeah.
3, 2, 1, go.
Suppressed everything.
4 out of 5.
Iconic screenplay.
4 out of 5.
Closing early.
4 out of 5.
Josh Brolin's mustache.
4 out of 5.
Anxious police deputies.
3 out of 5.
Javier Bardem as Chigurh.
4 out of 5.
Captive bolt pistols.
3 out of 5.
The Coen brothers.
4 out of 5.
Walking across the border to awake to a mariachi band.
3 out of 5.
Winning a coin flip.
4 out of 5.
Losing a coin flip.
2 out of 5.
Non-ending.
5 out of 5.
Psychopaths being dangerous like the bubonic plague.
4 out of 5.
$100 for a shirt.
4 out of 5.
$500 for a jacket.
2 out of 5.
Attempting to persuade a man that cannot be persuaded with money.
4 out of 5.
Film score.
4 out of 5.
Southern accents.
3 out of 5.
Tommy Lee Jones as himself.
4 out of 5.
1 second. Stormtrooper aim at distance is greater than 2 meters time.
Through. Okay. You'll never know what my thought on that last one was, I guess.
Darn.
It was a through. Okay. Yes. Very fun. Haha.
Oh, should I do my thing now for
I
next
think so.
episode?
Do it.
Okay. In our next episode, we will be discussing Sing Street, which is a musical of sorts. It's about this kid who likes 80s music, and it very much has an 80s aesthetic. I'm sorry, Mitchell, but it was going to happen. They pull it off really well, in my opinion, and the music is good, and it's good vibes. It's not a blockbuster, so yay for that. And we'll catch you next time.
Okay.
Yeah, this has been Cookie Pocket, episode 15. And it's on the
Bye.
podcast. I forgot to mention that. See you later.